I feel bad for Skype.
You know, yeah, like remember Skype? Those were the good old days. You needed like a third-party software just to record the meeting.
But they didn't update with the times, and I feel bad for them because they didn't anticipate. And I guess that's just consumerism and capitalism, but like.
True. I remember, so I was working this job in logistics before I got, laid off with the rest of the world in March of 2020. And that was the first I had heard about Zoom, where they were attaching it to Microsoft Office. And so I assumed, because the rest of the company was archaic as hell, still using Microsoft Office, like the software version that you actually had to install on the Windows and configure the settings. So they were like, we're adding this new program to it called Zoom. I'm like, that's probably some old shit I've never heard about. Use Skype like an adult.
It was weird. It came out of nowhere. I was just finishing school when the pandemic started, and they're like, we're going to use Zoom now. I'm like, I guess this is the school's own system, but no, it just was the thing.
Yeah, clearly this is its moment, and this, there's no future ahead of it, so they got to get it while they can.
And I commend them. I didn't think of it.
Yeah, Zoom and divorce lawyers. Those are the two things that thrived after March of 2020. But
someone had to.
How's your day going, Ari?
It's going well. I'm working from home today, so I get to chillax for the most part. I filmed, so that was fun, and it's been calm.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, I have Ariana Alexis with me, YouTube video essayist, filmmaker, writer. Am I missing anything?
That seems to be it.
Okay, well, thank you for joining me. It is an honor. I've been a fan of your work for the last 2 to 3 years. And we're going to be getting into a review of Clerks II and just kind of the career of Kevin Smith in general. And that being said, one of the first videos that really got me into your work was a very detailed history of the Clerks animated series. And you were, and maybe to this day, still one of the only people on YouTube to really get into that, just despite the cult classic status that it's gained since moving to DVD and people finding it years and years after the fact. What was your inspiration to put that history together?
So I have been a little bit of a Kevin Smith historian for my entire life. As I said in the video, I first got into Kevin Smith because of Clerks animated series when I was 8. So he's been a constant presence through my life, and he's kind of shaped who I am and what I've done. I used to be in science, so I did my master's in evolutionary ecology. And when I was doing my degree, I remember listening to Smodcast and being like, I'd rather be in film and TV and YouTube. And he was the one that inspired me to pursue my dreams. So when I decided to make YouTube videos, it was all just the things that I think that I could be the only one to do. And I know that Kevin Smith's history isn't an exclusive to me, but his history in perspective to where I was in my life and how I saw it, I think was kind of the voice that I wanted to put on it. So I decided to throw it out there and to finally make my magnum opus at the time, which was just basically the history of Kevin Smith, but also the history of me and a little bit behind the scenes of who this person was that inspired the channel, essentially.
100%. That is quite possibly the biggest cultural impact of Kevin Smith to begin with. Was not only did he put together Clerks on a shoestring budget, didn't sleep for several days while working at the Quick Stop to make the original Clerks, filming it at his workplace, fucking shuttering the windows so he could have an excuse for filming at night and then working that into the script. I feel like he inspired a multitude of filmmakers, both successful and still pursuing their dreams, and showed to millions of people that it was possible to do it without studio backing. It taught people to be scrappy. And I do think there's a lot to be said about, people on YouTube whether they admit it or not, either vicariously or directly, they have a lot that they owe him and the work that he did over 30 years ago.
Okay, he didn't start the indie film revolution. I think that
No.
I don't know who did. I'm not going to pretend like I know, but I feel like he popularized it in a way, and like making yourself be your own product. And I think that's essentially what YouTube is. It's broadcasting yourself. So like it's a way for people to be filmmakers in a very small, insular sense that doesn't require the big production value that a giant movie would require. And like, I know a movie is different than like a 12-minute YouTube video, but I think in the day and age of what's the easiest thing to get, YouTube video is probably the biggest comparison to Clerks, maybe, that someone's gonna watch, because no one watches short films anymore.
Which is a goddamn shame. I think Kevin himself attributes Richard Linklater and specifically Slackers for his own inspiration. And I don't think he knows who started that revolution at the beginning. And maybe if he doesn't know, and if it wasn't Linklater and Linklater doesn't know, then maybe we never will. One thing I really appreciate about your channel is the variety of topics. Most recently, you covered the history and kind of destruction and maybe revitalization of the old McDonald's mascots, Ronald McDonald, Grimace. And it took me until watching your video to realize, holy shit, they haven't been in commercials in several years. Because I feel like there's enough Grimace jokes on the internet where that in and of itself will convince people through a Mandela effect that those characters still exist in, bigger popular culture. So that was a bigger hit. You also did one for the history of the Space Jam website, a now foregone part of old internet, and especially people like myself who saw Space Jam on opening night. I appreciated that one specifically. That might be the first one I ever saw of yours. What is it? How do you go about picking the topics for your videos? Like, what inspires you?
So I have a hobby of just like thinking of random shit, and that's like it's not a unique hobby to me, but like my mind goes everywhere, and I think about everything as I see it, and it feels like everything is constantly processing. So like if I notice something, the first thing in my head is that a video. And like, I don't know if it goes any deeper ever when I first think about it, but like I explore it a little bit to see if there's like a hint of something interesting. And then if there is a hint of something interesting, then I'll go down that track. So for Ronald, for example, I noticed that Ronald was gone, but McDonald's was also like a huge thing in my life. So once I dug a little deeper, I found out there was a little bit of a hole I could go into. I went into that hole. So my process for making videos is basically like, what do I think about on a daily basis? What piques my curiosity? And then how can I link it back to something that's personal to me? So for the Space Jam website, for example, I also loved Space Jam. And my dad worked in advertising, and he's in animation, and he knows a little bit about the animated history of things. So I felt like that was my kind of into it, looking at how it related to movies and commercials from the beginning, and then going into the well that was Space Jam. But yeah, it feels like it's a lot of just like the world and how it tickles my curiosity, and then like the angle that I can put in it, because I see that there's several videos made about the things that I made videos about, but it's how can I get my little paws on it and like put my little face on it so that it's very distinctly Ariana, that nobody else can touch it in the way that I'm doing.
That's wonderful. I absolutely love that. You have a In Defense Of series in which you take either controversial, polarizing, or even universally hated characters from television series. A lot of them have been for Bojack Horseman. There have been some for Parks and Rec. And you kind of go into their history, the context of when they grew up, and not to excuse their behavior, but to explain it and, contextualize it, almost bringing more depth to the character in and of itself. The last one you did was
It was
What's the
Joseph
name of
Sugarman.
Joseph Sugarman? I forgot his name, despite having seen Bojack like 6 or 7 times all the way through. And that seemed to be the biggest challenge for you, where you did one for Sarah Lynn, but you kind of put a disclaimer at the beginning of like, okay, apparently nobody hates Sarah Lynn. She's universally beloved. My bad, we're doing this anyway. And you did one for Ann Perkins. You did one for Beatrice Horseman, which I feel like might have been a little easier because of the Time Zero episode. How do you even start defending Joseph Sugarman? Like, what was that point one for you?
Well, when I watched the show, like I watched it in a time where I wasn't really online. It was before me getting into the fan groups and the Reddits. And I never saw him as this asshole or this monster. Like I know that person. He's my he's not my grandfather, but like I know him. He's like any older man that I've met and like have heard stories about. And they're not bad people. They're just products of whatever the time considers moral. And I remember getting online and hearing everybody calling him a monster. And when I did the first video on Beatrice, everyone's like, well, Beatrice isn't the monster, it's her dad. And I'm like, well, he's not that bad a guy. He's just like a man who tried to do right by his family. And yeah, I felt there was a dissonance between like what I felt and what the community was feeling. And I was trying to make a video about it, but it's really hard to like explain the fact that he's not a dick because like these are the things that you can see in the show because people are going off based on what's in the show. And if you just go based on what's presented in the episodes and not consider any of the context of the series, he's pretty evil. Like he tries to marry off his daughter and he lobotomizes his wife. Like it's difficult to try to meld that with he's a decent man. So I decided to try to take it in a more academic, like empirical way where I'm like, no, if we're going to look at it like in terms of the context of the time, how do we make that more scientific? And then I brought in my evolutionary background, where again, I said evolutionary ecology was my like master's. I looked at plants, but like the principle still stands for every living thing. So I try to do it in a way that you couldn't really argue with me. Like you could argue with me, but like scientifically it was difficult, if that makes any sense. So when I make an argument, I try to think of like anything that people can say I'm wrong about, and then I address it. And I felt the way to do that with Joseph was to say like, well, scientifically, this is what the literature says. And like you can debate with me philosophically, but I'm coming from it in a more scientific way. So that's how I started it and ended with Joseph. It was difficult, but also like, it was difficult because I was dealing with like morality, which is a very like wishy-washy subject, but like, again, putting the stamp of like, this is the way that I know I specifically can do it. And I know other people can do it in a scientific way, but I'm the only one that did. And I will take that.
Yeah, and to your point, morality or the general concept of what's moral and what isn't, those guidelines, they ebb and flow depending on the time that you grow up in and the time that you're living through. And Diane kind of even very early on in the series makes her what I believe is the thesis statement for the entire show, where they're like, there is no good people and bad people. There are the things they do, there are the ways they're affected, and like the best thing you can do is try to be better today than you were yesterday. Mm-hmm. And so I thought you hit the spirit of the show really, really well, especially in that video about Joseph. And and I watched Time Zero and the Old Sugarman Place since, and I've thought of your video during those subsequent viewings. It definitely made me look at it differently. I think your work is incredible. So I just wanted to put that out there, before we really dove into things.
I appreciate that. I get a lot of like mixed comments, but it's really nice to know when like people appreciate it and it helps them in some way recontextualize media or a way of seeing things. So like, I thank you.
No, of course. And, thank you for coming on here. You have mentioned, you mentioned earlier in the interview, your history with Kevin Smith, your inspiration for your channel. So what we are here officially for is to review the 2006 Kevin Smith film, Clerks II. Shit. Um, I hadn't watched it in maybe 2 years before Saturday night when I was, putting all my notes down. And I wasn't expecting to put my own personal opinions in the Google Doc I shared with you, but then it became really hard not to. But I guess we can start at the beginning. So a huge motive for Kevin Smith to return to the Clerks universe and the Buick universe, which was originally, I think, supposed to end with Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back in 1999, was the critical and commercial failure at the time of Jersey Girl, which came out in 2004. Uh, you know, in my opinion, unjustly shat on due to the fatigue people were feeling of Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck. And there has been kind of a reappraisal, especially within the Kevin Smith fan base in the last couple of years, highlighting possibly our overreactions at the time and highlighting the, positives within that movie. How do you feel about that movie now?
Jersey Girl?
Yeah.
I've always loved Jersey Girl. Like, I watched Jersey Girl before realizing that it was a Kevin Smith movie. And, like, granted, it might be tainted by the fact that I watched it when I was, like, 12, 13. But, like, it's always been a movie that felt like there was heart to it. It got me into Sweeney Todd. I love Ben Affleck and George Carlin. So, like, it feels like it always had something to say in a way that was unique and interesting. So, like, I've never not loved Jersey Girl. I don't understand the hate for it. I was shocked when I found out that people didn't like it.
Yeah, and I wasn't a huge Kevin Smith fan until college, and I was going to film school. And so everybody around me was like really, really, really pitching these ideas to me. I think the first one I saw was Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. That was in high school. Wasn't a huge fan, still not a huge fan. I think it's the lesser of his work. But the first thing I saw in college was Dogma, which I thought was incredible. And I saw Jersey Girl for the first time, maybe in my early to mid 20s, like 2013, 14. And at the time I was like, okay, this is not his best work, but I appreciate him taking the risk that he did. And I saw what he was trying to do. The thing that has stuck with me so much was Carlin's performance. And I think it's a shame that he didn't live longer to truly explore the dramatic work that he could have done. Because that scene at the end, his monologue about not wanting to die alone, shit. Like, I ugly cried the first time. And fun fact, I went to one of Kevin's very famous Q&As a couple years ago. And I was thankfully the last in line of people who were able to ask him questions. We were all kind of running over with the venue. Venue staff was already kind of annoyed with us. But so I tried to like keep the question quick. I was like, you mentioned, this was for his documentary Clerk, where he's talking about his whole history coming out. And there's a whole segment about that, about being a fan of George Carlin and then having the pleasure of working with him. And so I tried to keep the question short. I was like, what was your experience like directing Kevin or directing George on Jersey Girl? Like, specifically about that, trying to keep the venue staff in mind. Kevin was not having it. And so you can actually see this on my channel as well. He dove into his entire oral history, being a fan, his dad loving it, his first time like meeting him at a restaurant to talk with him about him doing Dogma, and his insecurity about George taking the material more seriously than the writer did. And it really made me wish that Carlin had more time to do the kind of work that he clearly wanted to do.
Well, he was obviously like I don't know if he was as interested in comedy as he was in having a venue to explore life and what, like, the fallacy of existence, which sounds a little pretentious, but I'm gonna go with it. his comedy was never funny to me. It felt like more like he was creating these dramatic monologues. And I think that was the value of George Carlin. And I find that a lot of people who are deemed comedians are better dramatic actors than a lot of people who call themselves actors are, because they're able to like clue into observations and feel things and like identify what is interesting about the human experience. And like I wish I saw Carlin more things. I think he would have been good. I remember Jersey Girl feeling like he wasn't a comedian because I didn't know him before that. I was 12 and it felt like he was somebody who was making the material come to life.
Oh, he absolutely was. And to that point, yeah, I couldn't agree more that comedians are, generally speaking, better dramatic actors, because part of being a comedian is reaching this wide range of emotion and making it convincing. Back to your channel, you did a whole video about the King of Staten Island and everything that Pete Davidson put into it. And I think Pete gets a bad rap because I think there's way more to him than surface level and the relationships. And I was one of those SNL weirdos who knew who he was like when he first started out. And so when he first started blowing up, I'm like, oh, y'all are late to this because this dude's always been fucking awesome. But yeah, and I think that goes to why when Kevin really wants to get emotional, he does. And going back to Clerks II, I think tone is a issue with both of the Clerks sequels. And I think the scenes as individual scenes are great, like the jail scene, which is probably one of the most dramatic things that Kevin wrote, or the end of Clerks 3. Spoilers for all of Kevin Smith's work, by the way. As scenes are fucking gut-wrenching, and I think his problem is the segues in between, because it feels like you're watching 2 to 3 different movies. And that's one thing I noticed watching Clerks 2 the other night.
It feels a lot like, and we were watching it last night too, and we watched Clerks 1 and then we watched Clerks 2, and I very recently watched Clerks 3, and I chose not to go back to it because I don't like it at all. I find that I'm very critical about things that I love, and I love Kevin, and I'm overly critical about him, which I feel bad about. But it feels like Clerks 2 and Clerks 3 are trying to be Clerks 1, and they're trying to follow the formula of Clerks 1, but in a way that feels like it's not mocking it, but it's like flanderizing it. You can see where like he's trying to repeat the beats, like the donkey show is when the dead guy in the bathroom. Yeah, and then the dancing on the roof was the hockey on the roof, and then you have these moments with the customers, and they're not as insightful and they're not as interesting as Clerks 1. They're a lot funnier, and I think they're a lot more interesting to watch, but they're not as like what Clerks 1 was, where it felt like it was kind of existential and a little surreal. And I feel like he internalized what his brand was, and now anything past that, it's flanderized and it's cartoony.
Do you think his forays into other genres, Jersey Girl, God, what was the horror movie he did that was great? Red State. Do you think the mixed reception on that has given him an aversion to taking risks on his more mainstream work?
I think so. I think that he does a lot for the fans. So like obviously that's a huge motivator, where he loves the people that love him, and he's super dedicated to the people that are supporting him, which is great. But I find that a lot of his I'm gonna sound so mean. I find that a lot of his fans like him for a very specific reason. Like they like him for like the dick jokes and like the tooting jokes, and it's very one note. And whenever he tries to venture outside of that, they don't really respond well, I think. And this is just me like being an online fly on the wall. I feel like one of my things that I do is like I like standing in groups, and I like listening to what's happening on Reddit and Facebook or whatever, and that's kind of like where all my videos come from. So this is the backdrop from where I'm getting all this from. They're very critical of him when it comes to anything that he does outside of Clerks and View Askew, and I think that it might temper what he chooses to do. Like with Red State, that was him taking a foray into horror, and it was really good. Like, I love Red State.
I loved it.
It was like, it was different, it was unique, like, same word, different way of saying the word. It made choices that I wouldn't necessarily expect Kevin to make. And then he did Tusk, and I didn't see Tusk.
Yeah.
I'm afraid of the concept, but I know where it's from. I listened to the episode of Smodcast where it's from, and it's very much like from the fan group, and it's things that people within the community would like and know. So I feel like he starts something and he takes it in the way that he wants it, and then he morphs whatever he's doing within that new thing to fit what his fan group will be okay with, and to kind of go into the member berries, as you said. He loves to be self-referential, and I get why, but like, because it feels safe in its company and you know you're going to be loved, but at the same time it just feels like it makes a lot of his stuff a little not as interesting as I feel like he could make it. And I love him and I love the things that he does, but it's not to where he, I think, could be.
Yeah, and you mentioned not liking Clerks 3, and you are far from in the minority about it. I'm one of like the 6 people out there that genuinely loved it, not because of what it was, but I did love the risks that he took, and I loved the story, like the real life story that led up to it. You know, I love that he wrote this other draft that Jeff Anderson read once and was like, no, not doing it. And then he kind of worked his own, personal struggles, his heart attack in there. And one thing where you and I agree about that movie is that the self-referential humor and all the references to Clerks 1 hurt the film. Like, I couldn't agree more with that. I wish he either cut that down substantially or upped the length of the movie from an hour 40 to fit in enough time to give Clerks 3 its own identity. And I still wonder if it's going to have a reappraisal in 10 years once the whole member berries and fucking everything trend has kind of worn down and we sort of forget about being tired of that and then watching Clerks 3. But I think that's always going to be a flaw. I will say, though, that to another point, like the acting that he pulled out of Brian O'Halloran and Jeff Anderson in both sequels, I didn't think either of them were capable of. Especially because he essentially pulled Jeff Anderson off the street for Clerks 1. And I think he has like one other acting credit besides the Clerks movies, and it's Zack and Mary Make a Porno.
I love Jeff Anderson. I think he's the best part of all of the movies. Being his friend from high school, he really lucked out. And I think it's a product of like them being older and understanding the material more, but also like Kevin knowing his friends and like how to pull the performances out of them. But I think it's also in Clerks 1, the scenes are emotional and they're very pointed, but I don't think they're as like tied to the characters themselves. Like they are, but like the characters aren't as deep. If that makes any sense. So like they're getting to a theme, but not to this. They're getting to like the big theme of the movie, but not to the core of who each character is that has been forged throughout universes and universes. So I think that kind of feeds into how he's able to get these like bigger performances from Jeff and Brian, because like you're right, they do get bigger and they do get better and they do become a lot more real with them being these people that he pulled off of the street or be in like community theater and Leonardo.
Yeah. How do you feel about, I guess this podcast is going to be about all 3 Clerks movies, and you know what? I'm okay with that if you are. How do you feel about the ending to Clerks 2 knowing what we know now, with the death of Becky, Rosario Dawson's character, and basically everything being set back to the status quo?
So that's actually a problem that I have with, I don't want to call it a problem, because I don't want to be too negative, because I do like it. I do like all of his movies, and I love being within the community. I'm wearing a Jay and Silent Bob shirt now. Like I'm there.
Fuck it.
That's a different story. I'll get into it later, but it was fun. But I find a problem with the Clerks series is that it's a repeat of the same themes of stagnation and feeling lost and not knowing what you're doing. And I watched the first Clerks when I was
14. And then I watched it again when I was 20. And I remember not feeling anything about it when I was 14, but I was 20 feeling like I was close to the characters and like understanding the idea of stagnation and not know where you were going and feeling like you're lost. And then I watched Clerks II throughout like 14 to whatever time I'm in. And when I was younger, it didn't, like, the stagnation theme didn't hit as hard with me because I'm like, yeah, of course, that's just the next level. But now that I'm like the same age that they were in the movie, it feels weird that they're still so focused on the same things that they were when they were 20, but in the almost the exact same way. And I get that it's a movie and it's him exploring who he is and like how he's feeling through the years. But it feels a little like, really, guys? Every time you watch it.
Already.
Because you're like, I don't like, it's the same thing, and it's not exploring it in a particularly unique way each time. And like individually in their own moments, it hits, but like as you're watching it as a series, you're like, I'm tired of them feeling the same thing and they're their own problems and they're not getting it. Whereas Kevin Smith isn't that.
I definitely hear that. I will defend maybe not the stagnation themes in Clerks 3, but definitely Clerks 2, especially kind of being in this situation myself now. Like for context, I'm 36. I actually just enrolled back in school like 6 years ago. I've been bartending, delivery driving, managing fucking cafes, not really knowing what I want to do. And that was basically my life, just maintaining until maybe a year ago. And the stagnation themes in 2, they feel more real to me now because I remember that point a year ago when I sat back and I realized how I was battling the same shit for a decade. And I didn't realize how quickly time had passed. And still, like, it's still hard wrapping my head around the fact that, like, I am not in the younger generation. Like, I'm a fucking elder millennial. There's two other generations behind me now. And so I attribute that jail scene to my realizing that. And on top of that, I think Randall especially, you know, the yin and yang of Dante and Randall was always, Dante always kind of wallowed in self-pity, not thinking about where he was the source of his own problems. And Randall acknowledged he is the source of his own problems, but A, he's not going to do anything about it. B, he's fine with it for right now. And you hear him say that to Dante during the jail scenes, like, well, yeah, look at all this shit we half-heartedly tried only to get back here. Maybe that just wasn't for us, and maybe the thing that is for us will hit us when the time comes.
No, that's interesting. I think that Randall is the character that feels like there is progression. Like you were saying, it's the most realistic character progression in like the series. I think my problem is that Brian's Dante is the one that is continually wallowing in self-pity. And I'm also, as somebody who is also an elder millennial and like is stuck in the trap of like, what am I doing? I started my career again a couple years ago, and like it's a constant cycle of figuring out who you are and what you want to do and what makes you happy, and you're never going to figure it out. And like I get that, but I think that for like when watching the movie in sequence, and like the fact that it's their own contained stories, and the fact that Brian never evolves, like you can see someone go through their life and see the ups and downs that they're going through. But within Dante's story, it's just very linear, and he's always very unhappy. He's always very whiny and complaining, and it doesn't seem like he's making any like concrete steps. It gets a little like grating, I think, especially in the movie universe. Randall, however, I like the fact that he acknowledges that he's unhappy, and he also acknowledges that he's his own problem. And I think that that's one of the saving graces with Clerks II, because it would get a little bit like redundant. And this is a question I also asked Kevin when I went to the Clerks documentary thing, is why did they stagnate? I didn't answer the question properly because I was scared in an audience, and he didn't he didn't answer the question the way I thought he was going to, and I don't remember the answer because I was too traumatized. But like, this is something I've been like wrapping my head around for a while, and like, it's a video idea I was thinking about, but like, I'm still slowly figuring it out why the theme seems so consistent between Clerks 1 and Clerks 2.
Well, you and I started talking because I suggested an In Defense of Randall Graves video. Like, that's how this whole thing fucking started. The thing, yeah, and I truly love Randall's. It's really more of a devolution than anything, because we all know that guy. We all know that guy who, maybe you were friends with him, maybe you just knew him. He was like too smart for his own good, distrustful of the system. You know, everyone knew he was smart, but everyone knew he was unmotivated, and you know, he didn't trust the status quo enough to believe that anything he did was ever going to make a difference. And in your 20s, that's fine, and it's rebellious and it's attractive. But when you hit your 30s, like, you realize that something in you just fucking curdled. And now in Clerks 2, Randall is like using downtime at work to troll a paraplegic dude on his inspirational blog, where you could never see him doing something of that nature in his 20s in Clerks 1, but you don't need the context in between the two to be like, okay, no, of course he's doing this now.
Mm-hmm.
Because eventually, like, if you don't progress, you just fucking go bad, like, you know, any plant, like, to your fucking point.
And he's doesn't like where he is, so he's taking it on other people who are trying and reaching out and doing the things that they want to do to make them happy.
100%. How do you feel about, actually, no, I'm scrolling through your things. I'm scrolling through your stuff now. I'm going to cut this whole part out because this is awkward as fuck.
I hope. Well, I'm not used to like talking off the cuff, so like.
You know, I've been doing this for 8 years, and I still constantly sound like I'm fumbling through my words, and I've just fully accepted that this is how it's going to be for here on out. And it's why I try to make my guests talk more than I do. So Smodcast and Kevin's career as a podcaster started in 2007. And it started, you said in the Google Doc that you felt like there's something to be said, but you didn't know what, about the timing of Clerks II and his podcasting career. And this is the same thing you wrote that I thought about the most, and I think it's because of two things. One, Clerks II was the first movie where he was really engaging the online community during production. And, you know, during pre-production, where he was taking feedback. I remember in the Back to the Well documentary, he talked about editing scenes the day they were shot and then showing them to the cast and crew like the following day. The first thing he did being that first conversation between Dante and Becky. And the second thing is just the beginning of the podcasting boom. You know, Smodcast started in 2007 and WTF started in fucking 2008. And both Kevin and Mark Maron were people who kind of felt like they were on the decline and used podcasting, which was this new form of broadcast, as a ways of talking directly to their fan base and kind of working their shit out on the internet without, I don't know, starting a blog or joining early Facebook. What is your relationship been with Modcast and podcasts of that nature, like early adopters?
So I like what I like, and I get really obsessed. So I got really into Smodcast, and that's all I listened to for 10 years. That was like the only thing. I got really into like a bunch of like other side things where I wanted to make myself feel smarter. Like, or I'm like, I'm going to listen to the science podcast. And then I just kept doing Smodcast until it transitioned into Stuff You Should Know, and now I'm trying other things. But I loved podcasts, at least I loved Smodcast because it felt like they were talking at me. So a lot of what I would do when I was listening to podcasts is I would do field work. I was in a field for 12 hours a day, counting seeds and like measuring flowers, and they would be these two guys just chatting with me and making me feel like I had friends, which is the saddest thing I could say, but also very true.
I relate to the heart to that.
They feel like friends, very parasocial in like a way that I don't hate. But it felt like they were there and they were talking to you, and they felt like you were making a real connection with them. And it was very reminiscent of like early YouTube, where they would like talk to you and you got to know them for their personality, but in a way that felt like more long form, more authentic. And I think that's how I connected to it. And yeah, I think that it did a lot for Kevin. Like it was the thing that kept his career going, because I was also thinking about that thing that I wrote where I said that Clerks II happened in 2006, the podcast happened in 2007, and then his work beyond there feels like there should be a connection. And I think you're right, where it was the first time that he started mobilizing his audience, and his audience felt like they could be friends with him, and they felt like they can listen to him and feel like they were involved in a conversation. And that's what I think really boomed the rest of his career, both filmmaking and otherwise, because he's known as like the guy that talks and the guy that like answers questions for you. And I also think it made his work, I don't think your question asked how I felt about it influencing his work, but I'm thinking about it now. I think
I'm interested all the same.
I'll take it. I think the way that it took his work was that he now became known for himself, because before he did the evenings out with Kevin Smith, but that was if you knew it, you listened to it. Yeah. Whereas the podcast was like if you listen to it, you're a part of it, and you now know him and you get to listen to him every week. And he started making work that was geared towards those people because he's into his fan base. And his work started to be less about like the individual movie experience and more as him like making things for the people that listen to him, so they no longer became standalone pieces of work. But I think I think that they were a lot more authentic back then, and I think now it feels that's the connection that I have with podcasts in the early days to now. It's hard to like have an opinion on them, like all podcasts going forward, because I like what I like, and I listen to that, and that's it for several years.
Before podcasting became a medium that you had to be an already famous person to really make it in, it really was like the fucking Wild West. And I think Kevin's starting it around that time when it was just, random people talking about stuff they were interested in, and the idea of others listening was an afterthought at best. I think Kevin starting it around that time made us trust him more, because it made him feel like he was more like us, which he kind of already did with his filmmaking. But yeah, nowadays, like, this is going to be the most old man yells at cloud thing that I have to say. Podcasting does feel a lot more safe now. And I do miss those days where things could just go on tangents and be unhinged, and you weren't waiting for like ad reads. And I don't know, I think there's something to be said about those particular days, as well as just 2006 through 2010 internet culture in general, like dedicated websites and fan sites. And it's a bygone era. I get why it's gone. I accept that it's gone, but goddamn, were we lucky to live through it.
I appreciate the structure that now has, where we figured out what people like, and we do what people like, and then that will get you views because it's tried and true what people like. But like, it was crazy. It didn't make any sense back then. Everything was random. It was a wild west of what people would watch. It was unstable, and I appreciated what it was. But like, as somebody who outside of YouTube also makes a living off of knowing what people, so I also do YouTube videos for a government organization in Canada. That's my thing.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that's my day job.
That's awesome.
I think it's fun. It's knowing YouTube. So I appreciate the safety. I also think the problem with the safety is that it makes people think that everyone can do it, which seems horrible. It lends itself to like everybody can be the star of the show without honing their craft, which I think is a problem. But like, you have to start somewhere, and like, it's cool that it gives people the ability to start somewhere, and like, if they want to advance, they can and get better. That's my maybe tangent rant about something. That's that.
No, I know what you're saying.
It made sense.
Yeah,
Maybe.
like you need the structure now, and I totally understand where the bar is lower. Like the bar for entry is way lower than it used to be, and it's easier to edit. And TikTok is a thing, and IG Reels is a thing. Editing is easier, and on one hand, I'm glad it's more accessible for people to express themselves. On the other hand, I understand where people feel like it cheapens the work that others have spent years honing their craft to do.
And oh, sorry, go on.
Oh no, go on.
No, I think I love the idea that everyone can do it, because it gives people the ability to start and do it, which is wonderful. But then it makes people do it. And so a bunch of people feel like they want to gain this celebrity and they want to have a platform, so they keep making content, and then it drowns out everybody who is advancing and making really cool stuff, or really trying things. And I think that's the problem of now, is that there's a lot less creativity and a lot more people saturating the market because they want to do the thing that everybody's doing.
Yeah, because there's plenty of people out there who are, YouTubers full time and depend on that income just to pay their bills. And the algorithm does dictate a lot of what they feel like they can talk about, whether they want to or not. I swear to God, the amount of YouTubers I saw talking about Drake and Kendrick Lamar when they clearly just wanted no parts of it. It was I'm a hip hop head, so I personally didn't mind it, but I also saw the deadness in so many of their eyes. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry that this is what I clicked on with you. I'm sorry, this is how I discovered you. This probably doesn't help.
Well, I think that's what's interesting about Kevin too, is that he makes you feel like you can do it. And I love that about him. But the thing about Kevin is that he was really good. When he did it, he did it. He was really good. And it's encouraging, and it's wonderful that he's getting people to do things. But at the same time, it's just as much as everyone can do it, not everyone can do it. I sound so mean. I don't know where I came from.
I'll help with this. Yes, he did do that. However, he also, listen to any interview, any featurette on the DVD, he always expresses all the fucking work he put in to make it happen. And the sleepless nights and the writing and the arguments with Scott Mosier and, keeping Jason Mewes off of drugs. At no point does he even try to imply it's easy. And on the contrary, I think he consciously tries to stress what a process it is before getting to where he's been. And even that, you need luck.
Yeah, it's luck, it's effort, it's a lot of things. I don't know how we got here, but I feel like I'm now going on a little vent about internet culture and the ease of making things, and how it's slowly but surely making the internet a lot more generic and
damn kids and their TikToks.
The kids and they're being able to edit on the app. It's crazy.
It's fucked up. No, you need a desktop computer for that. You need a good one. Yeah, I didn't train on Adobe Premiere 6 for this.
There's a lot of effort into making good TikToks. It's a lot of effort, but they don't tell you that. It's one of the things that they don't mention to you when you're starting TikToks. They're no, just record yourself and edit the app. I'm not doing that.
Oh yeah, absolutely not. My TikTok is mostly dog videos. With a couple of podcast clips mattered in. But it's usually he has been incredibly well behaved. He usually interrupts my interviews at some point, barking out the window.
He's been such a good boy. I wish I had a good boy here, but I only had brought my movies hat to
don't you have a cat? I thought you had a cat.
Oh, I don't have a cat. People think I have a cat. That's not my so I have a stock image of a cat that I use for the audience. So
yes.
Whenever the audience is talking, that is where I'll throw in the picture of the cat. That's not I don't have animals. I'm very allergic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm just
Okay, no, that's exactly where I got that impression, especially because the lighting is similar. So like when it cuts back to you talking, I'm like, oh, her cat's cute.
I just color grade. I'm just a little color grading monster.
But to your point, that attention to detail, that's what does it. And you got the audience that you do. So boom.
There we go.
God damn it. All right, Ari, I'm not going to take up much more of your time. It has been an absolute honor to have you on here. Is there anything you want to talk about that you're working on currently that we can expect? Anything you want to plug before we head out?
Well, I am slowly but surely working on a new video about In Defense of the Pick-Me Girl. I find that there has been a lot of really toxic discourse going around where people are like picking on people who are pick-me's, and they're now taking pick-me's to be people who just disagree with things that fall within like modern pop neoliberal feminism. So it's talking about the rise of that sort of behavior and how Taylor Swift contributes to it. So basically it's just a little takedown of Taylor Swift, which I am expecting a lot of people to hate me about, but I am very excited about it. And that's what I got going. I've been writing that for a little bit, and I'm excited to edit it.
Yeah, I try to see the good in just about anybody, and I genuinely can't stand Taylor Swift. The only, like, her saving grace to me, and this is really, really reaching, is the spotlight she shined onto artists and the way that they get paid via streaming, which she didn't do for people who are, like, trying to just pay their bills and are musicians. Like, Taylor did that for Taylor, but that's like the one thing, like, nugget of hope I have. So I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you. Yeah, she loves doing things for herself, and as a consequence, sometimes things happen for other people, which is great because she's got a voice, and she changes things maybe for the better for other people because she's trying to help herself, which is great. But like, I don't love what she's doing with weaponizing feminism. So that is that is me trying to throw a stone at the Goliath.
All right. Well, shit, I am looking forward to that. Well, Ari, thank you so fucking much. You did not have to do this. Your audience is like 1,000 times more than mine. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I'd love to have you back on to talk. I know I'm going to end up covering Bojack and Raphael Bob Wexford at some point. I'd love to have you back on if you have the time.
Yeah.
And thank you so much. I hope your day is wonderful. And I've never been good at outros, so that's where I'm going to leave it.
I will say my little bit. Thank you again. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I've never been on a podcast, nor have I no one's ever asked me. I don't have one, and I appreciate the fact that you asked me and wanted to hear my opinion on Clerks II. And I look forward to talking about Bojack Horseman, which is all that I think about in my normal life, and just like anything else you need voice on, I will happily chime in.